Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Danielle Vegara. I'm the Director of Alumni and Parent Engagement here at Landmark. This is my fourth school year. And I am a part of the advancement team working at Landmark School, and I work very closely with the Landmark Parents Association. So I'm thrilled to have so many of you here, particularly those who've come who are at the EMS campus currently. Welcome to tonight's event. I think we have two very different campuses, and we're thrilled to have you part of this, because if your student transfers to the high school, I'm sure they'll be seeing some of these terms and practices. So welcome to Landmark Learns. Landmark Learns is a series of educational presentations, workshops, and resources for current parents and guardians. And what we do is we take different topics and utilize our in-house resources to bring them to parents and guardians and really work through some of the things that your students are facing. So tonight we are focused on motivation, particularly strategies to connect with your high school student and examining yourself through a lens of motivation. We have two wonderful presenters with us tonight. We have Mr. Kyle Clark and Miss Lauren Torres. They will unmute themselves in just a moment. And before we get started, I just want to explain how tonight's event will run. So everyone should be muted right now. It looks like everyone is. Thank you for that. Soon I will mute myself as well. You're welcome to come and go this evening. If you have things in the oven or little people you need to get to bed, feel free to utilize this time as you need to. This event is being recorded and we will share it after the fact. So we will continue to utilize these resources. So anything that is said or shared here is being recorded. I will manage the chat and respond to as many questions as I can. Throughout the presentation, we will not take questions actively. However, if you put them into the chat, I will copy and paste them and I will respond to, or I will ask our presenters, better yet, to respond to your questions at the end of their presentation. So they will present for about 50 minutes, and at the conclusion, if there are similar like questions, I will combine them and direct them towards our presenters. So if you have questions throughout, just feel free to put them in the chat, or if you'd like to save them for the end, you can do that as well. I'll also add our presenters' emails in the chat. So if you have any specific follow-up questions or conversation you'd like to continue with them, you're absolutely welcome to do so. So I promise we will wrap by 8:30 tonight, and I'm looking forward to learning a bit about motivation myself. So in the interest of time, I welcome Mr. Kyle Clark to take it away. Oh, I'm going to unmute you, Kyle.
Thanks, Danielle. Appreciate it. So we're really excited to be here, but before we get going, we just want to include everyone on a little tidbit or a little helpful hint in terms of the technology, specifically the Zoom interface that you all are working with. So you'll notice that on the right-hand side, I think most of you have a little rectangular window that has some faces in it. And sometimes that might be in the way of some of our content or a video or two. So if you put your mouse to the very top of that window, you can see that there's 4 different options that kind of align a square, 2 lines, and then looks like a 3x3 cube. You can minimize that. You can make it one face, just whoever's talking. Essentially you have options, and we just wanted to let you know in case it didn't, just so it wasn't distracting or got in the way. But let's get to the more important stuff. So we want to, again, thank you guys for being here. Lauren and I are very excited that you're willing to spend your Tuesday night with us. And we have some strategies we like to share. And we want you all to kind of know that we are not pros on any of this, okay? Our subtitle here, Examining Yourself and Student Through a Lens of Motivation, is just that. We're here to offer an examination, hopefully one that moves beyond this presentation. And we hope that motivation too is a bridge, and that it will help you see results and getting some more proactivity. But at the end of the day, we also hope that it has kind of a more global impact, which is just connecting, right, with your student or students. All right, so let's get started. So this is the big picture agenda for tonight. We're going to start by giving you guys kind of a more in-depth look at where Lauren and I come from. Then we're going to get into a kind of a fancy buzzword. Maybe some of you have heard of it before. It's called metacognition. And that's going to really lead us into the kind of the global, like big picture type thought process we want you all to experience and move forward with. And really what that's going to speak to is getting you to reflect on your own experience with motivation. We all come from different backgrounds, have different struggles, successes, and all of that. And we're hoping that can kind of tie into our presentation. Not only that, we have some feedback from students themselves. We know that they're not experts in motivation, and that's probably why a lot of us are here. But we do want to hear from, straight from the horse's mouth. We want to get an idea of where they're coming from, hopefully to inform how we approach trying to motivate them a little bit better. We have some good meat and potatoes too, which are the strategies. That's kind of the bricks and mortar of this presentation. And we're hoping we can leave you with a couple things that you can try with. And then at the very end, we're hoping we can wrap it all up together into giving you a tool that you can hopefully use with your student in order to map out kind of exactly what we're looking to build in this presentation. And then just as Danielle said, at the very end, we'll have some questions in case there's some lingering thoughts, comments, or concerns. All right. So first and foremost, as Danielle already said, my name's Kyle Clark. I'm from Essex, Massachusetts, so I'm a local to the area. I am a campus coordinator, and that is my residential hat that I put on. So if you're a parent who has a resident, then you've probably seen me at the window when you check your student in or out for the weekend. But my job essentially entails working in that office one day a week. It's on Mondays after school until about 10:30 at night, or one weekend a month. And I'm essentially there to help enforce the structure, create activities, and manage any kind of disciplinary issues. Beyond that, academically, I teach in the language arts department, both for writing and as a film literature teacher. For the last 4, maybe 5 years, I've been the boys varsity lacrosse coach, although last year doesn't really count because we got cut short. And overall, I've been at Landmark for 7 years, and I'm hoping that that streak continues. So I'm going to pass it off to Lauren, and she'll give you a better kind of view of what she's bringing to the table.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Torres. I grew up in Boxborough, Massachusetts. I am the assistant phys ed department head, and I teach oral expression and social communication. I've also taught tutorial in the past. I'm an adjunct professor for Southern New Hampshire University. Currently, I'm teaching a social emotional learning course, which a lot of this ties into that. I've also taught expressive writing and study skills and executive functioning there. This is my 9th year at Landmark. And in addition to those responsibilities, I've also coached. I lived in the dorms. I have a pretty well-rounded experience here at Landmark. So hopefully some of this insight will be helpful for you all.
Excellent. So just out of curiosity, and again, I'm not here to throw anyone under the bus, but and this is more of a rhetorical question, right? How many of you filled out the survey? So if you remember, Danielle sent out a couple emails, one in the beginning to kind of gauge interest and get people to sign up, and then another one to remind you about the event tonight with the link to this Zoom. And in both those emails, there was a survey. And if I could gauge hands or answers right now, I probably would, be looking around to see who filled it out. But at the end of the day, it is essentially a rhetorical question and a trick question at that. Because if you look here, this is my survey. Oh, there's 0 responses. Now, again, some of you might have already filled this thing out and had some technical issues, or I might not be registering everyone who actually filled it out. But at the end of the day, we're using this as just kind of a funny way to poke fun at the fact that we all have issues with motivation, right? And kind of putting this on our plate and understanding that we don't all get everything done is just a way to ground us a little bit and to help us kind of put ourselves in the shoes of our students so that we can better understand where they're coming from. Hoping that at least will kind of give us a good starting point. So at the end of the day, we want to remind you, don't worry, right? We're not perfect at motivating either. And I think let's acknowledge the elephant in the room. Lauren and I are not parents, right? And that's a whole different element to motivation. We're lucky because we've had practice in a very specific elements, in a very specific landscape. We've had a lot of practice about it, professional development, training, our education, our background, everything has been kind of geared towards this. But at the end of the day, no matter what, we encourage you to think about this idea, this relationship between trial and error. It seems simple, but I can tell you that that's worked very well for the two of us. I think Lauren can relate, but as a young and new teacher, kind of trying to find, your persona as an educator, you go through this, like, what do I need to do to get students to listen to what I say? And I can remember being a first year teacher and having some issues trying to get kids to really listen and engage. And I thought, well, you know, I'll be there. I'll be like a friend, you know, we'll connect, and then they'll appreciate me on that level. Right. But I found out that that didn't work so well. Right. Started to kind of, if you give a, what is it? If you give a mouse a moose, a muffin or something like that. This little kid story, right? They're going to take that extra bit. So my point is that trial and error is vastly, vastly important, because the next time I went about it, I was too strict. I was, holding the line on every single rule, allowing very little flexibility, and it just didn't click. And it wasn't until that third attempt where I started to find, okay, that was, too far. This wasn't enough. I found that Goldilocks kind of porridge right in the middle, and it clicked. And even to this day, I'll tell you that I'm still trying and practicing and failing, and all of that works to make me have better balance. So we want to add some humor before we get going. So before we get into kind of the nitty gritty, we want to introduce a quick clip from this movie called Office Space. And if you haven't heard of Office Space, it's a funny drama about kind of the typical 9-to-5 job. And at this point in the film, our main character, who we'll see in a minute, he's wearing a t-shirt and a button-down shirt. He's had an issue with employment. He's had an issue motivating himself to get up, feeling activated at his job. And he had this epiphany, right? He had this epiphany that, you know what, it doesn't matter anymore. I'm going to show up late. I'm going to do whatever I want. And then there's a board that's come to kind of make cuts, right? Cut out the fat and try to make the company a little more efficient. So this is their conversation. And let's see if we can make any connections between this and our kids.
Would you walk us through a typical day for you?
Yeah.
Great.
Well, I generally come in at least 15 minutes late. I use the side door. That way Lumberg can't see me. And after that, I just sort of space out for about an hour. Till I'm finished.
Space out?
Yeah, I just stare at my desk. But it looks like I'm working. I do that for probably another hour after lunch, too. I'd say in a given week, I probably only do about 15 minutes of real, actual work.
Peter, would you be a good sport and indulge us and just tell us a little more?
Oh, yeah. Let me tell you something about TPS reports. The thing is, Bob, it's not that I'm lazy. It's that I just don't care.
Don't care?
It's a problem of motivation, all right? Now, if I work my ass off and Initech ships a few extra units, I don't see another dime. So where's the motivation? And here's something else, Bob. I have 8 different bosses right now.
I beg your pardon?
8 bosses.
8?
8, Bob. So that means that when I make a mistake, I have 8 different people coming by to tell me about it. That's my only real motivation, is not to be hassled. That and the fear of losing my job. But you know, Bob, that'll only make someone work just hard enough not to get fired.
Would you bear with me for just a second, please?
Okay.
What if, and believe me, this is so hypothetical, but what if you were offered some kind of a stock option equity sharing program? Would that do anything for you?
I don't know, I guess. Listen, I'm going to go. It's been really nice talking to both of you guys.
Absolutely. The pleasure's all on this side of the table, trust me.
Good luck with your layoffs, all right? I hope your firings go really well.
Excellent. Great. Wow.
All right, so maybe some of us can relate with that. Maybe that's a little too far-fetched for others. But the big takeaway from that, beyond the humor and about, the ironic part that they're basically rewarding him for being lazy, is that he spent some time to think about what motivates him, right? He comments on being motivated by fear. He comments on motivating by finding value in something. But that's kind of the jumping off point for our next topic, is that thought process of how or why.
Would you walk us through a typical day?
We're not going to watch it again. So metacognition, this is that buzzword we brought up in the agenda. And it is, simply put, awareness and understanding of one's own thought processes is the nuts and bolts of metacognition. And this kind of leads us to a cycle, right? It's essentially thinking about thinking. So this cycle here, let me see if I can give you guys an example. I don't know. I'll think of something random like creating a presentation for motivation. How about that, right? Let's say that I was asked by somebody to create a presentation. I'm going to assess the task, right? This piece at very top. I'm going to think to myself, what do I need to do? Is that going to be challenging? Am I going to have to put myself out there? How much time is it going to take? Then I'm going to evaluate my strengths and weaknesses. Well, I know I can't do this alone. I'm going to need help, right? So I'm going to go find a colleague of mine. Maybe I'll find someone named Lauren Torres, right? She could potentially help me out. We could balance each other out. We create a plan together. We start to figure out where are we going to start, right? Where are we going to assess? Where are we going to, eventually follow through? We're going to develop some strategies. We're going to think of things that we can do to help people connect with our presentation, think of ideas that will resonate. And then once we've created it, we've presented it, we can sit back and reflect and figure out what worked and what didn't work. For most of us, this happens at a natural, almost subconscious level, right? Not all of us, right? For some of us, this is a learned skill. This is something that we often teach our kids as much as we can in all different content areas. It's thinking about thinking. So how do we use it in the classroom? Well, we ask kids to self-monitor and reflect all the time, to think about their own behaviors, what worked, what didn't work. In my language arts classes, we have writing portfolios where I hand back work and the kids look at their grade and they think, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? How can that inform me on my next essay? We have cooperative learning groups so that kids can work with kids with different learning profiles and start to kind of, again, understand if my strengths are this and Jimmy's weaknesses are that, how can we work together to create, to finish our goal? We verbalize all sorts of actions and thought processes. Why don't you tell me what you were thinking when you said that, right? Or what happened that made you not finish your homework last night? Can you walk me through the steps of what might have gotten in the way? Assisted and structured planning. So we often, scaffold a lot of activities for kids to give them manageable steps. And those steps help them see kind of the nuts and bolts of a plan, right? The things that come naturally to others. We use a lot of Socratic questioning, and the simple word for that is just prompting, right? Asking kids, not necessarily giving them the answer, but asking the appropriate questions to help them get to the answer on their own. So it almost feels like self-discovery, guided self-discovery. We do a lot of modeling and we provide examples, right? We want kids to be able to visualize or see what we're asking them to do so they have something to base it off of. And a lot of consistent opportunities for practice, right? And that's where that trial and error piece comes into place, okay? So that's the classroom. And I know that's different than what you are all looking for, but this is just gonna set the stage and we're gonna circle back to this a little bit later. So at the end of the day, and again, I'm not looking for you to answer this question right now, but I want you to consider, right? How do you think about motivation? Like you on a personal level, not motivation for your student, but you for yourself.
All right, so to get you to kind of be metacognitive about motivation and what Kyle's asking you all to do about thinking about how you all are motivated, we have some questions here that we just kind of want to get the ball rolling with for you to think about. So the first question is, when have you been the most motivated? So for me, I realized I was most motivated when I was being coached by someone. So I decided to do a race, so I hired a coach. I was much more motivated in that circumstance than if I had just been training by myself. Also, when I'm with a group of people, like doing an activity together, that motivates me as well. More so for different activities than I'd be doing by myself. Like if I want to run in the rain, I'm going to be more motivated to do that with a friend than by myself. So if I can think about how I've been motivated or what motivates me, perhaps there's space for me to make connection with my students. The times I've been the least motivated are when I have to grade online on a computer. Do not enjoy that process. Love doing it for your children. Don't love doing it as much for like the Southern New Hampshire classes. And not because I don't enjoy hearing what people have to share. I just don't enjoy the process of sitting at a computer screen and typing and focusing on the screen. So I recognize that like sitting at a computer screen may be hard for students, especially in this week of remote learning. So I try to create breaks for students to not be in Google Meet or to get up from their computer, because I know that that's where I also struggle. I also create discussion like, hey guys, what's going to be hard about the remote week for you? How do I help you in what's hard for you as your teacher? And again, I know that like it's different in a classroom versus at home. But I reflect on my own inability to be motivated sometimes, and I can connect with students on that. And when they see me as a flawed human also, they're more likely to connect and try to help me out. So when I was younger, I really wanted to please people and not get in trouble. And that was my motivation, for better or for worse. You know, there's definitely pros and cons to being motivated by that. And I was not motivated if I didn't get recognition. You know, I needed the gold star or the participation trophy. And so recognizing that that is how I benefited from being motivated as a kid, I can take a few steps back now as an adult and think, okay, where do I need to become intrinsically motivated rather than seeking external motivation? And how can I create that for myself? And then incorporating and rejecting the strategies you were exposed to. So if you can all go back and think back to your childhood, you know, like what, 10, 15 years ago, maybe. What was your experience with motivation like? Was there a parent or a guardian who was able to motivate you? Or whenever they asked you to do something, you automatically didn't do it because of who was asking you to do it? So we just want you all to think about motivation for yourselves, because if you can look inward, then it's easier to look outward and perhaps share or connect or help reflect with your student. So just take like maybe, 30 seconds, kind of look this over and pause and think about your motivation. All right, so here, visual cues can really be helpful in a lot of ways. They can help monitor your efforts. They can help they can help you understand your students when maybe your students don't even understand themselves. Big part of that: tone, facial expression, flush skin. That my skin's probably like blotchy red right now. That's like you can tell I'm like excited to do something when that's happening. Fidgeting, sleep patterns, different habits. So kind of just like paying attention or being aware of what your student isn't saying as far as what could be challenging for them. And I'm sure many of you had experiences and still do with students who, they seem like they're working really hard at something, but it's not coming to be. And so their motivation starts lacking because they're trying and they're trying and they're trying and they're not seeing the results. So kind of recognizing the efforts even when the results aren't what they're hoped to be. So visual cues can provide more insight than I think we often realize. So we asked you all to look at yourselves, your habits with motivation, your experience as a child being motivated or lacking motivation. So now I'd like you all to take some time to think about when your student lacks motivation. Like think back to when they're doing homework, or what teachers say at parent-teacher conferences, or what your child says. A lot of times students have the answers and we don't take time to listen to them. And I think that as adults, we feel oftentimes that it's our responsibility to get ahead of any challenges for students, to create the ideal scenario for them, which is great if we can do it, but also not always plausible. So recognizing that when the student lacks motivation, what can we do to help them? What does it look like for them, and where and how do they need us to support them? Strategies we've experienced may be helpful or they may not be helpful. And that kind of goes back to what Kyle was saying when at the beginning of his teaching career, he's going to be the friend teacher and then he's going to be the strict teacher. For me, I started off this year like, I'm going to be fun and funny teacher because it's a pandemic. And 3 weeks in, it was fun, funny class, and I had totally lost control of it. And I had to express to my students, hey guys, I like having fun, but I let it go too far. Like, that's on me. We need to learn because now our fun is getting in the way of class. So like recognizing that, like, in my attempt to motivate them, it went too far one path. So I had to communicate that to them and just kind of own my own mistakes. So when we can own our own mistakes, then hopefully we can teach students to do the same. Okay, and then the flip side of that is, what does it look like when your student is motivated? I know I have a lot of students who play hockey or getting up super early, going to bed really late. Like, they're motivated, they're committed. What is it about those things that they're motivated to do that motivates them? And how can that reveal their values and their goals, so that if there's other things they're not necessarily motivated to do, we can recognize how they operate and try to fuel that fire for them, if it's something that would ultimately benefit and be really helpful for them. So recognizing when they have motivation, what that looks like, and recognizing when they're not motivated and what that looks like. So really getting metacognitive about it, and just being aware of where your student's at is going to be hopefully really helpful. So what we'd like to encourage you all to do is start a dialogue, and not to say that's not being done. I'm sure it's being done in countless ways, but I think what's challenging is sometimes students just don't want to talk. So sometimes starting a dialogue looks like sharing something about yourself with them and seeing if they can connect with that. If you ask how's school and they don't want to talk about school, is there a common point that you can connect with them, just to get them chatting? I find that the best way for me to get students to open up is to just share parts of myself where I've struggled, what my frustrations have been, and create an environment where that kind of conversation is frequent and regular, and becomes commonplace. And again, classroom is different than the home situation, but I think students are often wanting to just be seen and heard and feel validated. So you could even express, like, hey, I had a really hard day at work and I want to support you right now, but it's challenging for me because my energy is drained, and like just owning that, and recognizing that we're all humans, models for students that it's okay to be human, and then hopefully creates an opportunity for them to connect with you over that. So we just have a little comic here. The mother is trying to convince Jeremy to volunteer. Are you going to volunteer this summer, Jeremy? I can't. Why not? It conflicts with my plans. And what are your plans? Not to make any. So recognizing that oftentimes our motivations are different than the student's motivations. Clearly here, she has good intention, right? Volunteering is a good experience. It'll give him something to do. There's so many reasons why volunteering in the summer is a great idea, but he doesn't want to make any plans at all. And so here we see her kind of getting into an aggressive, dominating position. And it's important to say, like, okay, what is it that why do you not want to make plans? Like maybe that your student is stressed out, burnt out, at their wits' end with school. And so the idea of thinking into the future is so far out of their realm of ability at that moment that they can't even think about it. Maybe it's that they actively don't want to do anything. But until we know what's holding them back, it's going to be hard to figure out how to motivate them. So just kind of, again, and that goes back to like including the student in the dialogue, is like, if we can learn about where they're at, how they're feeling, then hopefully we can connect with them and then be able to motivate them. So when I was asked to do this presentation, I just went to my students, and I said, hey guys, I got to do this presentation for your parents about motivation. Here's the general topic. Like, what should I say? Because as I said, students are the number one experts on them. So some of the things students had to say were, don't set me up to violate your trust. Don't compare me to others. If you don't understand, ask questions. Provide support, but don't impose. Rewards are better than removing something. Don't compare me to others. Believe them when they tell you something. The students are saying that about themselves. Make sure the standards are relative. Validate success when it happens. And if you aren't interested in what I am, then at least try to understand why I am. And so this is a combination of my students and Kyle's students, and I teach in the expressive language program, and Kyle teaches in the founders and prep program. And between the two of us, we teach freshmen through seniors. So this is kind of a summary of what students from across the programmatic, from across the programs, I guess. It's very uncomfortable presenting to a screen where I can't see any faces except my own. I apologize. So this is what the students had to say about motivation, the message that they wanted their parents to hear. So I think it's just, again, it ties back to like, what are students saying? What is it that they need? So at Landmark, I'm sure you're all familiar with the Landmark teaching principles. They are what guide our instruction across the board with all of the classes. And so we are going to tie the Landmark teaching principles to this presentation. So the first one is to provide opportunities for success. So in the classroom, how can we modify or adapt assignments so that students can show what they know without being penalized for how they learn? So I would encourage you to think about at home, how can you provide opportunities for your student to be motivated? And that can look like, trusting them until they lose your trust, and then like recognizing that could be like a hard or frustrating situation, but that you trusted them as much as you could. And then there's a starting point for a dialogue there. The second is providing models. So at school I do it, we do it, you do it. So like the teacher would do something, the class would do something, and then the student would do it individually. So sharing with students how you're organized, how you get motivated, what's really hard for you to get motivated for. Just like recognizing that like you both exist as humans with struggles. And so how can you provide a model as somebody who can maybe be motivated to do something you don't really want to do, or motivated to do something you do want to do, but either way, kind of just looping your child into that dialogue. The third teaching principle is micro unit tasks, and that's just what it sounds like. So taking larger tasks and breaking them into really small, manageable pieces. So for some students, their executive functioning is overwhelming. Executive functioning is too overwhelming to them to be able to, get from point A to point B. So in the writing process, we have a 5-step writing process that we teach. But for, cleaning a room, that could look like, okay, step 1, pick up your dirty clothes in the corner and put them in your laundry basket. Step 2, make your bed. And then like for some students, they may need even more specific instruction about those things, but trying to parse out like, where is their disability coming into play versus where is their lack of motivation coming into play versus where is their energy levels coming into play. It's a lot to think about, but it all plays into what we're asking students to do and how motivated they are to actually do what we're asking. And the next one is include students in the learning process. So in classrooms, we write the agenda on the board. I can give you an example of when I was a kid, I got a speeding ticket, just one, I promise. And he sat me down and he was like, "Hey, Lauren, this is your car insurance bill. See how much it costs? Okay, now see how you got a speeding ticket? Now it's this much more expensive. So like that's what you have to pay now that you got a speeding ticket." So rather than him saying like, "Why were you speeding? That was irresponsible. That was dangerous." He said like, I'm concerned for your safety, and also you have to pay this like extra amount of money. So like, even if you're not concerned about your safety, here's a bit of motivation. And that was so helpful. And that like ever since then, I've been a much more cautious driver than I was when I was, 17, 18 years old. So including the student in the learning process is a really big one. 5, multi-sensory approach to learning. So in the classrooms, we talk about tactile, visual, auditory, reading, writing. This is a big opportunity to bring technology into motivating students, setting timers. I had my students in one of my classes, they went into their settings on their phone and they were seeing how much time they spent on each app. And they were appalled by the amount of time they were spending on TikTok and Instagram, to the point where they were setting their own time limits on their apps, because they were like, there's no reason I should be on Instagram 8 hours a day. That is ridiculous. It's like, yeah. So I didn't say you shouldn't be on Instagram 8 hours a day. I just gave them the tools to recognize that they had been on Instagram 8 hours a day. And if they wanted to change that behavior, there was something that they could do. So setting reminders on phones, giving checklists on phones, like all of those things are really helpful as far as like structuring students for success and providing a multisensory approach. And then ensure automatization through practice and review. So helping students just achieve what they need to achieve. And we can ask students to do something once and they do it. So we know they can, but they may not have it ingrained to be able to do that multiple times. So how can we reinforce and reinforce and reinforce so that it becomes second nature to them without having to use their working memory or their executive functioning skills? And that is going to look different for each kid.
All right, so we're going to take a minute to kind of look into each of these 6 principles with a little bit more depth. Lauren did a great job of really giving us kind of the cross between what it looks like in the classroom and how that can translate back home. And I don't intend on repeating what she said, but we want to give you kind of some more, I wouldn't say concrete, but maybe kind of draw the line in the sand about this is kind of a strategy that we found has less success, or at least less often. And these are things that we think could benefit motivating your student, at least at home, right? Outside of the classroom. So again, some of this is being taken right from students, their feedback, but also again, from our experience working with and really kind of diving into metacognition and everything that Lauren has been taking some good intricate time to tell you all about. So when we talk about providing opportunities for success, we want students to do just that. We want them to feel successful. We want them to build some self-worth, right? So we want to stay away from pressuring them to do something that they don't want to do. And I know it probably hurts a lot of you to hear that, because in life, we have to do things that we don't want to do. So, right, that's not a black and white suggestion, right? But there's some wiggle room. The do kind of supports that. You know, maybe giving students the options to brainstorm, coming up with ideas together, basically forming a compromise and meeting someone in the middle is showing the student that you're invested in what they want, right? Rather than pushing them to do what you want to do. So for example, right, if we're looking to get a student to get out of the house, get off the computer, disconnect from electronics, you know, get some fresh air, and exercise is the concern, right? If they're not somebody who wants to go on a run, if they don't want to go on a walk, maybe they can do something that applies to their interests. Could be skateboarding, right? Could be rollerblading. I don't think anyone rollerblades these days, but you know, could be bowling, right? An activity that you could even do together, or just to kind of help get the ball rolling. Anything like that can have a lot of value. Providing models, right? We talked about you setting the example. And it's so important that we don't want to assume your student is not paying attention to you, right? We know that kids from a very young age are noticing every little facet of what you do, what you think, and they don't even always know that they're noticing it. A lot of their ability to analyze and identify your habits and your tendencies and your little idiosyncrasies are all tied into kind of a subconscious kind of inherent need for growing. Right? They want to figure out what to do, and you're around them the most. They have you in their viewfinder the most. So you are a good way to kind of demonstrate proper behavior. But like Lauren said, that behavior is not always perfect, right? And if we set a good foundation and let them know, right, that we are humans and we don't do everything perfectly every time, maybe it's going to take away some of that guilt when they do fall and they need to be picked back up. All right. So if we do drop the ball, right, we can kind of show them that, hey, listen, I'm a human, right? And I'm going to communicate that so that they know that we're on the same page. But also it's important to acknowledge small wins. So if we ask a student to do something as small as clean your room, and all we get out of it is they folded their laundry, right? We can at least push them in the right direction and let them know that that small gesture was still at least headed in the right direction. That doesn't take away the fact that we can push, you know, the next step and provide challenge. You know, we can kind of couple that compliment with the challenge at the same time. It almost cushions it in a way. And micro-unit tasks, just like Lauren said, right? If we come up and just say, hey, listen, I want you to go ahead and do all of your homework, do the dishes, and clean your room. we find that that's really challenging. And I can speak to a little bit of our residential work where we're trying to get students to do just that: clean their room, organize their desk, be on time for study hall, all those things. When we tell them to do it all at once, it's a lot, right? We know that a lot of our students have issues with working memory, and we need to be able to kind of support that. We want to help them kind of grow, just like a muscle, right? So it could be a checklist. Checklists are really a good kind of visual reminder of what to do. We don't have to remember the task. We can kind of look right at that checklist, and we all know how good it feels to check those boxes off. Okay. So write down expectations, make checklists, and also remember that these kids are going to go at a different pace than we want them to. So we need to keep that in mind. And that's going to come with that metacognitive process of trying to figure out what their process is so that we can kind of step in the right place to make sure that we're being as efficient and as effective as possible.
All right. So next one, include student in the learning process. Don't constantly check in after something's been started, is our recommendation for a don't, unless the student has asked you to do that. Try to really listen to them, their feelings and their thoughts. So to Kyle's point, when we're overseeing study hall during coverage, some students will say, hey, can you check in on me every 15 minutes? Because I get super distracted, and that's awesome. If they have that enough self-awareness to be able to ask us to do that, that's fantastic. We reward that. But it's for some students, they feel like they are not given any space to explore and get it wrong, or aren't given time to identify what they don't understand, then it can be a bit suffocating for them. So what they're asking is like, don't constantly check in unless, that's something that they're asking, unless their nonverbal cues tell you otherwise. But recognizing that sometimes it's good to check in depending on the subject, the day, the mood, and sometimes not so much. But ultimately, really listen to them, see where they're coming from, try to seek to understand where they're at. Multisensory approach to learning, I touched on this earlier. As far as don't force a strategy that has continued not to work. Sometimes I do that in the classroom as well. I'll give an assignment and then I'll give all of the students the same feedback. And then that's a great time for me to turn and say like, oh, well, if all of the students needed this feedback, I didn't do a great job teaching it. How do I do better so that I don't have to give the same feedback to all of the students? So don't force a strategy that doesn't work. Try to compromise with them and their preferences. Sometimes students will ask things to me that I don't even understand what they're asking, but it seems important to them. So I'll go along with it. And sometimes in the end, it's not what I wanted. But they were given an opportunity to go their own path. And then I can have a conversation with them about why that path did or didn't work. So rather than saying like, no, you can't do that, I say, I'm not really sure what you're asking, but why don't you go ahead and do that? And then we can talk about it. As far as like final exams, I'll have students, they have to do, for my social communication class, they have to do a self-reflection project, and that can take any form they want. So I've had students write essays, write books, do pottery, 3D printing, painting. And so I give them total freedom to say like, okay, what is it that you want to do? Okay, do that method for this project. And so as much as you can give them freedom, they appreciate and respect it, and feel seen and heard. And that's a really strong way to help them be motivated. All right, and then the last one, assure automatization through practice and review. Don't try too many different strategies or approaches at once. And then be consistent. If one day a kid does something and you're good with it, great. And if the next day you're in a different mood and you respond to them differently, that's going to be a confusing message to them. And I say you, but I really mean me, because Mondays are different than Fridays, and first period is different than third period. So recognizing when I need to take ownership over the mixed messages that I'm giving students based on where I'm at. And so how I can recalibrate to communicate effectively with them, because the goal is for them to be able to communicate effectively with me. So if I'm falling short of that, I need to recognize it, repair it, and then share with them that experience. And that will help students, will provide models, etc., to help them shift and adapt and grow into adults, happy, healthy adults, hopefully.
All right, so I promised you all it would come full circle, and this is it, right? So in the beginning of the presentation, we had this buzzword that we've been throwing around called metacognition, and we really set the stage at school, right? But we also want you to realize that these things work at school really well, right? They're practiced, they're researched, and we've had successful results. But that doesn't mean that they're going to apply and work perfectly at home. So these are just to kind of help us think about how those skills could apply, right? And it comes down to simply like pick your battles, right? If there are some things that are worth fighting for motivating a little bit harder, right? Save your efforts, save your energy, save your strategies for those, and be okay with letting some of the small stuff slide. Let's understand that ownership sometimes is more potent than motivation. So what I mean by that is if a student for some reason isn't able to complete a task that you have asked them to do, but they're willing to own up and really look back and reflect and say, I screwed up, I didn't do it. And if they can even outline, I didn't do it for these reasons, even the better. Okay, we want to encourage failure as a moment for learning. And I know that seems kind of hallmarky and sappy, but we really find that these kids are so afraid of failure that we need to encourage them to engage with it a little bit more, but at least in an environment where they know that they're supported, where they know it's going to benefit their next move. Think about students in relation to self. This is kind of, we're beating a dead horse at this point. This is something that we've brought up so many times, is that the reason we want you to think about what motivates you, what's worked in the past and what hasn't, is because typically they might be having the same conversations in their head, right? And we want to create a relation and a dialogue between the two of you. And consider your intentions to motivate, right? Why am I motivating, right? What do I really want to get out of it? And what do I want? Control? Do I want to see productivity? Do I want to see, something actually get done? Am I looking for, just a better relationship with my son or daughter? And all of these things are motivating factors, but we need to consider the why, right? Why am I actually doing this? Ask them to think and reflect. And this is not an easy task. I mean, how many of us are willing to just sit back and reflect? It's a very challenging task to be that vulnerable and to open up your thought process, not only to yourself, but definitely at least to others as well. So if you model that behavior and you give them an opportunity to see that this is what didn't work for me and this is why, and then you can ask them to reciprocate, there might be some value in that. You might be able to start a dialogue. And again, that's not going to work right off the bat. There's some baby steps involved. And again, we get ourselves into trouble with this all the time at school, right? Don't just teach, but try to assist. And sometimes kids feel like no matter what, everyone is trying to tell them what to do, right? The teachers at home, the teachers at school, the coaches, the parents at home, older siblings. The list goes on and on and on. So let's give them an opportunity to realize that we see value in what we're trying to motivate them to do, and we want to encourage them to also share in that value, right? Or at least that view of that value, and that we're here to help. And again, the big one is balance. Easier said than done, right? Let go when it's appropriate. Find an opportunity to motivate when it's, worth motivating, and use different strategies in different moments and try to create some kind of equilibrium the best way you can. Again, that's a lot easier said than done, but it's good to at least think about it. And I'm sure that will help kind of inform your decisions. So all of this feeds into this process of thinking about thinking. So what we're going to do now is Lauren's going to show you a little bit about what you can actually use at home and maybe kind of put into practice and activate some of these thoughts so that they're not just these abstract ideas sitting in, in the digital virtual world. So maybe you've all have heard of an algorithm or a mind map before. We're going to take a look at that and apply that to the scheme that we've been introducing to you.
All right. So I teach social communication, as I mentioned, and a large way that I try to teach skills that are not tangible is to help students create mind maps or these algorithms. And so I find that for people like myself who are highly emotional, could benefit from a time like thinking time or a meta moment, as Mark Brackett refers to it in the Ruler program, is trying to map out a situation so you know what your options are when your brain is like too cloudy or too emotional to try to think through your options. And so this is just an idea of how it could look, and it's going to be different for every parent, guardian, child situation, because you and your child are going to have different reactions than this kind of generic explanation. But this is what it looks like. So if you're trying to motivate your child, you start up here. Is it important to you, the topic? I'm sorry, it's important to you, but not your child. So for some people, that's, I absolutely want my kid to go to college. Your kid isn't driven to go to college. You want them to go to college. So then you look to the next one. Is it for you or your child? Do you believe college is in their best interest? Okay. If it's for your child, share the reasons it's important to you. So you sit down with them and you say, here's my concerns about you not wanting to go to college, right? And then you encourage them to ask questions. You answer questions and you kind of go through this cycle over and over again. If you realize you want to motivate them for your own benefit, then maybe you let it go. Maybe not. Maybe that's one of those times you pick those battles. Then the next one is it's important to your child, but not you. You can't understand why they want to be on the bocce team. You've never been interested in bocce. Why is your kid trying to play bocce? So then you ask questions. Why is it important? If they answer them, then you listen, and then you ask and listen. If they don't answer, then tell them, have that conversation with them. Hey, I really want to support your interest in bocce, but I'm not really understanding what it is about bocce that you're into. So like, can you help me understand you? Right. And then you can go back up to asking questions, etc. So you can see how this kind of plays out. And again, it's just a very generic approach to motivating, but I think it helps to create that metacognitive space where, as teachers, as parents, perhaps it's easier to kind of get tunnel vision about what we think, want, and expect. But this will give you pause, hopefully, and again, feel free to create it for yourself, for your child. Sit down with your child. You could create it with them. Like, what's our move? What does this look like for us in our family? What does this look like for you? So hopefully this kind of gives you an idea of what you can do or what you can build for you and your family.
Thanks, Lauren and Kyle. You guys did a great job. I certainly learned more than I had anticipated as well. Now, we don't have any questions right now, but as folks perhaps need a moment to think of things, I have a question, which is for parents who, and perhaps, teachers, adults, when you come to a roadblock with a student over, so Lauren, you gave the college example, when you get to that roadblock and you get to a place where the conversation just isn't going anywhere, sort of what's your advice at that point once you've calmly expressed your concern, and you don't really feel everyone sort of has had their opportunity to say something? What's the advice at that point for folks?
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's gonna be to let it sit. Which is not that helpful, right? Like, you're asking me what to do and I'm saying do nothing. But I'm just like, let it sit, right? Because sometimes when topics like that are so energetic or emotional or passionate, right, it just becomes kind of like a loud discussion, and there's not necessarily a lot of back and forth there. So like, if it doesn't seem like it's getting anywhere, take that pause. Like, I love you. I want to communicate with you. This isn't going well. Let's revisit it tomorrow. Let's revisit it next week. And then the emotions are gone. Not necessarily gone, but like the emotions are lessened, right? That maybe it's over hot chocolate instead of in the car. Maybe it's somewhere where somebody can walk away and take space instead of in a closed in space. So when it's not working, just like saying like, okay, this isn't working. I want it to work. I'm going to think about how to do better by you. And if you can do that, it's really hard, but then you're modeling for a student, you're modeling for your child Like, it's okay to say, like, okay, I need to think about this. I haven't articulated myself well. So every time that we extend an olive branch, like, we're showing that it's okay to extend an olive branch.
Hmm.
Is
Thank
that
you.
it? Your question?
Um, I have another sort of general question. For students that aren't motivated um, by material things or privileges or opportunities, do you have any suggestions for ways to sort of have a productive conversation with them, to find what motivates them, so that you can work together and you can move forward?
I think there's definitely room to have a conversation about, if they don't have items that are on their list that are going to motivate them, either being by, being given or being taken away, that there's a good conversation to be had about what do they find value in. And I think that that can kind of serve two purposes at once. It can almost be a, kill two birds with one stone, because you're kind of investigating a little bit deeper into your student, into your child. And I think that we're all motivated by different things, and things aren't always the option, right? Sometimes we're talking about abstract concepts like free time, sleeping in a little bit later, but incentive can work, really can be really valuable. And I think that at the end of the day, um, it's just a matter of, again, I feel like I'm going in a circle, but having a dialogue about that. And if there's not a time for a dialogue, find the time and the space where that dialogue is going to be more efficient.
Mhm.
And just to kind of piggyback off of that, we keep saying have a dialogue, and that's ideal. Absolutely. But sometimes I'm sure we all know, like, kids are shutting down, right? They're not having that dialogue. And that can be a really good time to own it. Like, I love you and I want to support you and I'm at my wit's end. Like, I don't know what to do. And then in that case, you're not necessarily having a dialogue, but you're owning the emotion of frustration that you're feeling. And again, that gives your child student another opportunity to see you as a human. So it's not like you need to. Some students at certain times aren't going to engage in that dialogue, and so how can you model effective communication for them in spite of their lack of willingness to have that meaningful conversation with you?
Mhm. Great, thank you. So just to respond to some folks in the chat, we will be able to share these slides that folks are asking about. So Kyle and Lauren put together this great presentation. When we share the recording, we will also share the slides. So those are coming. So those are incoming to you via the newsletter. If not this week, then next, but we might be able to get it this week. Are there any other questions at this time? Here's one. So someone is asking for strategies when the lack of motivation might be safer than try and fail. And I believe you guys touched on sort of failure a little bit and safe and unsafe ways to fail. So I believe the question is asking how to push or perhaps nudge a student that is afraid to fail when they need to be motivated.
So the way I'm reading that is it's about, like, a kid wants to go to a party maybe, and it's not safe, right? Lack of motivation might about it being safer not to try. Is that what it is?
Oh, perhaps I was reading it in a being safe to fail scenario rather than a student safety perspective. I think you're right, Lauren. Yes.
Well, here, can I just say something? Sorry.
Yes, Beth, please do.
Yeah, sorry, it wasn't clear. No, I was just curious if thoughts that you had, strategies for if someone doesn't want to try because they might try and fail versus not trying is like, well, I don't care. Do you know? One is a
Yeah,
failure and the other is,
I see.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what I would suggest too is, like, opening up about your own times that you've failed and how it's felt for you, and being honest about that. Like, that's, I think, a really good time to, as we talked about, like, provide a model. Like, hey, I know you're really scared right now, and I was really scared, and I failed at. I'm trying to. I have tons in my head. It's just I'm in a Zoom video chat, so it's hard to come up with one right away. A failure off the top of my head. Oh, but say, like, I was doing a triathlon a few years ago that I trained for, and my bike chain broke. 2 miles into the bike, and it's just the race is just over. Like, I don't have a bike. There's no more race, and, like, a bunch of people knew I was doing the race. I had been training, and I just failed at it. And like that was a bummer. I spent money on the race, at the hotel, all these things. And no matter what I did, I still failed. And recognizing that like failure is just that. It's like you didn't do something well, and that's what it is to be human. And I know that's a really hard thing for high schoolers to hear, but if you're honest with them about your failures and that you are who you are as a result of both your failures and your successes, then maybe failure just becomes a little less scary for them.
Yeah, and I think, if we're if we're kind of overusing the, talk about yourself, be transparent about your own failures, right? I found that when I was a child, I did very well when my mom or my dad related failures to people I looked up to, whether that be pro athletes, actors, things like that, who I saw, they figured it out, right? I didn't really think about them failing because they're at such a high level of success that I assumed that everything just worked out for them. And again, just that nature of putting it into perspective, at least in their world and their interests, also helped me see that, failure are building blocks. And I know that they're not always like, failure isn't always a good thing. And I know that's even be challenging for parents to be okay with seeing your child fail, that doesn't seem right. It almost seems a bit counterintuitive. But if anything, failure is just another opportunity to build grit. And I thought that the more often that I tried something and got back up, I slowly learned that good buzzword of growth mindset. And I felt very, very, very motivated when I knew that every time I got back up, it was only making me tougher. And I know that's a hard kind of connection to make at a young age, but I think at some point kids do see value in grit. But they have to know that they are, capable of that grit first.
Thanks, Kyle. We have another question. Do you see initiative and having or lacking motivation as the same thing? So I think that's asking sort of the relationship between the two, or perhaps the separation. Lauren, do you want to answer that first?
Yeah, so I think that it depends on the situation and on the student. A lot of times students that we have at Landmark struggle with the initiative from an executive functioning standpoint. So it's hard to speak to all students based on their learning profiles. But some students may just not know how to start. Like when I was in college, here's a good old personal narrative. I studied for this blue book history exam, the good old days where you had to write with pen in a little blue booklet. And I got the exam and it was like 5 short answers and an essay. And I looked at my friend, I was like, I don't know any of these. And he looks at me, he was like, no, you did the whole study guide. I know all of it. And I just used your study guide. And so then I had to pause and think like, oh yeah, no, I know all of this. And I ended up getting a like 98, 99, who knows, on the exam. But the point is like, I didn't have the initiative there because the emotional component was so high that I was super motivated, but I couldn't initiate the task because of everything that was going on in my head. That went up to that task. So I think for some students it's initiative, but I think for other students it can be emotional, and I think it depends on the task and fear of failure. So that I love that question. I think it's a really interesting question. And I think that for students who are willing to dialogue, it would be a really good question to ask them. Like, do you just not want to start this, or do you not know what to do? And see where it goes from there. That's kind of what comes to mind for me. Kyle, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I think that there's another kind of the yin and yang of fear of failure is also the fear of success. And I know that seems a bit counterintuitive, but I find that when kids all of a sudden start to realize that, whoa, Mr. Clark knows I can do this, I better, pump the brakes, because what that's going to mean is more challenge and more area of discomfort. So we have to always keep that in mind as well. That kids are not looking to always, they're not used to making quick progress because they've always maybe felt a step behind. And unfortunately, they use that academic setting as kind of like as a viewfinder for their self in general. So we just want to, keep in mind that success can be scary. That's why we want to almost tier it or structure it or scaffold it appropriately, and be patient.
Thank you. We have a few more minutes if anyone else has any questions. I know I particularly found so interesting as you talk about that relationship between um, fear and discomfort, and that's a fine line, and I see our students straddle it often, as well as
We
myself.
and I talk about that a lot. You know, that idea of discomfort really rings a bell with athletics, I think, a lot as well. You know, on the lacrosse field, that's our motto, is find comfort in discomfort, right? That the more often that you provide yourself at least a little bit of discomfort, you're going to find that, one, there's a self-realization that I made it, I figured it out, and it wasn't as bad as I thought. But more importantly, when you have that discomfort more often, you find that it's a realm or a landscape that becomes more familiar. And then it's not as scary because it's not an unknown. And I think that's what we're most afraid of these days, is the unknown.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it doesn't look like we have any more questions at this time, but I just want to mention that I put both Kyle and Lauren's email in the chat. So if you'd like to follow up with either of them, obviously they're a wealth of resources and knowledge, and they would be happy to have conversations, particularly if it's more specific about your student or support your family might need. So at this time, I want to thank Lauren and Kyle so much for a wonderful presentation and answering our questions. And we look forward to learning more, and I know utilizing these resources going forward. So thank you both so much. Thank you everyone for making time tonight. We very much appreciate it, and wishing you all a healthy, happy holiday season. So take good care and please be in touch if you need anything.